Hello, I'm Samar Ciprian and welcome to Moon Yoga's YouTube channel. This video is about bladder health, and this is a question I've been asked before. And bladders are something I work with a lot in my practice, and they seem to be an incredibly distressed part of our bodies in this modern time. So this is just a collection of what I've seen and what I've seen that's worked, and it's generally pretty simple. So what I most often see with women is something called interstitial cystitis. And what that is generalized bladder inflammation without a known cause. That often looks like needing to pee all the time, just red hot inflammation, not being able to empty fully, and when tests come back, there isn't an infection present that can be detected. So there's a couple of things here. The first one is mechanical issues. So I have so much gratitude, I mean, it blows my mind actually, so much gratitude to my RVGO training, because it's given me a whole new perspective on what can go wrong with the body and how simple it is to fix it. My holistic pelvic care training also really plays into this. So what can happen in women is the uterus is mobile because of ligaments that suspend her. And when the uterus gets stuck or is sitting over the bladder in some way, that really affects the bladder's ability to empty fully and effectively. So what can happen is the inside of the bladder is kind of like the craters of the moon. It has all these little craters and pockets that fill up with urine. And what can happen when the uterus is either sitting on top of the bladder or pushing the bladder from one of the sides or some other variation in between, is those pockets don't empty completely, and some urine crystals can stay behind, causing inflammation. So this can set up a situation that will start to look like interstitial cystitis, and women will go on antibiotics prophylactically, even though there's no infection present. They'll do all kinds of things, and the situation tends to worsen over time. What I've seen with many clients is once the uterus is lifted off the bladder, they do have a vast improvement in symptoms, and that's just amazing. And it's really liberating to know actually that women can do this for themselves. So mechanical issues are huge. Related to this is also something called a cystocele, where the bladder starts to push into the vaginal wall. And this tends to happen, I mean, what I've seen happen because of pushing. So the inflammation that may or may not have been created by the actual placement of the uterus, or there are other causes too, but this is a common one. That inflammation can make the woman want to push out as much urine as possible. And that constant pushing can really cause the actual bladder to push, like collapse into the vaginal wall a little bit. And when that happens, somebody will go to pee, they'll try to pee, and then they'll stand up and feel like they need to pee again. And I personally have experienced this a few years ago in quite an intense way, and it's like nothing else. It's like nothing else you'll ever experience, and it's pretty horrendous. And the best feeling ever is when it stops happening. So I know personally that it can stop, and it's actually quite simple to fix that. And I've seen this with so many amazing women that come into my clinic. So there's hope. And it doesn't take that long given the right tools. So in a case like either of those cases where there's just constant inflammation and a constant need to pee or not being able to empty fully, body work is really, really, really helpful. If an actual infection is present, you do need to deal with the infection first, otherwise body work can flare that up. But in the case of interstitial cystitis or a cystocele, a combination of internal and external work works really, really, really well. So I recommend finding an RVGO therapist and or a holistic pelvic care provider in your area, and I'm very happy to point you in the right direction. So feel free to reach out to me. If you don't have people like that in your area, you may have people practicing similar things, so it's worth starting to look around. So that's the first thing. There's often a mechanical issue. The second thing that seems to not really get talked about very often is an autoimmune connection. So I've seen this a lot with women, is that their bladders will flare and there's clearly something going on in the gut and there is some level of autoimmunity starting to happen. And so this may or may not show up on tests, but there are often other symptoms the person's experiencing with a flared digestive system. So this is a very complex topic, and in many ways it's also really simple. Basically what happens is the intestinal walls start to not be as strong as they once were, and a level of permeability happens where particles of food and other toxins find their way into the bloodstream, and that sets up a situation where the immune system starts to attack the body because of a case of mistaken identity. So those particles and foreign substances should not be in the bloodstream, but they get through a weak gut lining, and then the body starts attacking itself. So one of the places that shows up first is in the bladder. And this can be really confusing for people because they're treating the bladder, but the cause is not necessarily coming from the bladder. So if you suspect something like this, then one of the ways you might figure out this is happening is when you eat certain foods and then you have a flare for a few days afterwards. Or you have periods of flaring and then periods where you're not flaring. That's often a big sign of autoimmunity. In that case, I would talk to either a naturopathic doctor or a functional medicine doctor or somebody else who works with gut repair, and see if you can really shift that by increasing the health and strength of the digestive system. I personally, this was a big part of my own bladder story, was that I was dealing with an autoimmune condition I didn't know about. What has helped me tremendously is going 100% gluten-free. And that is often because gluten is one of the big triggers for autoimmune situations. And that's simply because it crosses that blood-gut barrier and sets off flares. So I'm not suggesting that's the case for every single person, but I have seen enormous, enormous changes. I mean, from tons of symptoms to pretty much none, just with one consistent change, and that being the elimination of gluten. So having said that, there are people that can go back onto gluten after a while. Seen that as well. You know, you'll only know that by trying it. So I suggest you really speak to someone in your area that can work with gut repair. And there's a lot of resources out there. I'm explaining this in a very simple way, simply because of the time we have on this video. It's quite a complex subject. But basically there's an autoimmune component that can be happening with bladder flaring too. So heal the gut, heal the bladder. So that's the second thing. There's mechanical stuff, immune stuff. And the third thing is stuff you're putting on your body and obviously in your body. So I want to talk about two things here. One is the water you're drinking. Tap water is notoriously full of halogens such as chlorine and fluoride and bromines and pesticide residues and, you know, pharmaceutical residues and heavy metals and blastocysts and all kinds of amazing things. So tap water is a huge issue for a lot of people that they may not be aware of. And one of the signs that this is an issue is people just don't want to drink water. If tap water is their water supply, they just go off water and they want to drink other things. So I would look for a source of sustainable, easy to access spring water in your area. That water will come out of the ground and be highly mineralized. It will be wild water with quite a high pH generally, and it will contain most likely higher levels of magnesium and calcium than you would have been getting in regular water. So that personally, the flaring for me really went away when my water supply changed. And I've seen this again and again and again with people. What ends up happening is you pee less often and you pee larger amounts, and there's less of a rawness and burning, and your body seems to absorb more of it. So water is a big deal, and it's worth trying, and it's a simple swap generally. In Auckland, I recommend the Ararimu water from Harvest or Huckleberries. That comes from quite close by, and it's really good water. So that's one thing. Second thing is soaps, you know, baby wipes or feminine hygiene wipes, the actual menstrual products you're using. Anything that's coming in contact with the genitals can really set off chemical flaring. And again, the root of this might be somewhere else in the body, but yeah, soap can be one of the worst things, or any kind of cleansing agent. Staying away from using a chemical on that part of the body and simply washing with warm water is quite life-changing for many people. And looking at the menstrual products you use, because they're so close to the urethral opening, and often there can be vaginal sensitivity at the same time as there is bladder sensitivity, and it can be quite hard to tell for the person themselves what's actually flaring. So take care of one, take care of both, really. And so I strongly recommend a menstrual pad versus a tampon or a Diva cup. Not to slam either of those, they have their place. But when you're dealing with someone with inflammation, anything inserted vaginally will create tension, it will create dryness, and then that will create, micro contractions and stress, which will make everything more heightened. So a pad is always better, either a washable, reusable, organic cotton pad washed in some detergent that isn't flaring for you, so an ecological detergent, and preferably hot water, or organic cotton pads such as Natracare or Dry-Ons, which my very, very sweet friend in Wellington, Belinda Falconar, is the distributor for in New Zealand. So there's lots of good options, but yeah, that can be a big issue for people, is having either tampons or the Diva cup in can set off a flare. So if you love those and they're not bothering you, that's great. If you are having issues, it's worth trying. Other than that, the term pissed off came from somewhere. So there's always an emotional and spiritual component with any kind of dis-ease in the body. And the bladder tends to really react when there's a lot of fear in the system. And so any kind of spiritual healing, or earth-based healing such as the Mayan spiritual healing, can really help lift fear. If you don't have access to stuff like that, flower essences can be great too. And just breathing and being present with, what am I really carrying around that's low-grade fear in my system? Fear might not be the only thing. There could be irritation at what's happening in your life too. Those are things to look at. But often by the time something has become really physiological, it will need a physiological fix. Honoring the emotions is really important, but expecting the emotions to simply resolve something that's become completely physical is not always fair on the body once it's reached that stage. So aside from that, often, especially if there's an immune component, things are a little bit out of balance in the microbiome. So you want to really slowly, not overnight, but slowly repopulate the good bugs and the good bacteria in the body so that things aren't as flary. So probiotic-rich foods such as unpasteurized sauerkraut, coconut water kefir, or dairy kefir if you like that, misos, kombucha, some people say has a lot of sugar in it, but it's better than the alternative soft drinks people drink. And yeah, all those things can really start to slowly shift the amount of flaring that's happening in the system, and meanwhile staying away from yeasts. So baked goods and seasonings that contain a lot of yeast can be flary for some people. So I'm not a huge fan of telling people to eliminate whole food groups, and I'm not going to do that, because I think that actually the most important thing is you start listening to your body and finding out what works for you. What worked for me was saying goodbye to gluten forever, bye gluten, and bringing in a lot more living foods. And by that, I don't just mean raw foods, although I do eat quite a few raw foods, but foods that are really, really rich in living bacteria, which is the probiotics I just talked about. And that has really changed my life and my immune system for the better. So may your bladder be blessed. Say that fast 10 times. May your bladder be blessed, and may you feel much more empowered in being able to deal with this situation. Honestly, I have seen women do amazing things. Sometimes, they've had these problems for decades. Sometimes they've been on antibiotics for decades, and there's always, always, always hope. So don't give up. Your bladder is a part of you. Your bladder is a reflection of everything that's happening in your life, and it can always get better. The last little thing just occurred to me now is also the position in which we urinate can make a really big difference to if we evacuate fully. And so things like a squatty potty or a lily pad in New Zealand, or just squatting over the toilet, or peeing how you would pee when you're camping, can completely empty the bladder, especially with people who have cystocele. So looking at elimination positions as well, it's not just for poop. That's the common understanding, is that using those elevated stools can really help empty the colon, but it really makes a big difference to how we empty the bladder too. So yes, there's, I'm sure, a lot more that I haven't mentioned here. Chinese medicine is a great resource for bladder health too, but these are the things I know that have worked, and if you have any questions, please contact me. My information is below. Thank you so much for watching, and as I said before, may your bladder be blessed, may your day be beautiful, and I will see you soon.